overnight. The showers and winds will ease, turning things calm but cold overnight. And that's how the weather's looking.
Good evening, I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Prince Charles says he's honoured by the Queen's decision to bestow his wife with the title Queen Consort when he takes the crown. As part of her Platinum Jubilee celebrations marking 70 years on the throne, Her Majesty says it's her sincere wish that Camilla receives the title. Meanwhile, a new photograph of the Queen working has been released to mark the milestone. The image, taken on Wednesday, shows the 95-year-old with her famous red box of government papers. She's the first British monarch to reach the milestone. Speaking about the Queen's request, former royal correspondent at The Sun, Charles Ray, told GB News it's a huge turnaround for the Duchess of Cornwall.
Remember, this is a woman who at one time was the most hated woman in Britain and was regarded as a marriage wrecker and famously the third person in a marriage which got terribly crowded.
The man serving life for the murder of Millie Dowler has admitted to killing Lynn Russell and her daughter Megan, according to a lawyer. Levi Belfield has allegedly sent a 4-page letter detailing his involvement to the solicitor of the man currently in prison for the murders. Michael Stone's lawyer says it shows his client has suffered a miscarriage of justice. Lynn and Megan Russell were found murdered in Kent in 1996. Belfield, who murdered schoolgirl Millie Dowler in 2002, is serving 2 whole life orders. The chairman of Tesco says food prices are likely to rise 5% by the spring. The supermarket chain says the impact it'll have on low-income families is troubling. It follows an announcement by energy regulator Ofgem that UK bills will rise by nearly £700 a year from April. A plane carrying American soldiers has landed in southeast Poland near the border with Ukraine. It follows President Joe Biden's orders to deploy 1,700 troops there amid fears of a Russian invasion of Ukraine. A US Army Boeing C-17 Globemaster aircraft brought a few dozen troops and vehicles. Moscow denies plans to invade Ukraine, but it's thought it has deployed more than 100,000 troops near the border. Patients awaiting major operations are to be supported by dedicated NHS care teams in a bid to prevent last-minute cancellations, which have been described as costly and frustrating. NHS England say people not being ready due to health problems account for 1/3 of surgery appointments being delayed. The measures are due to come into force from April next year. Long-running soap opera Neighbours is being dropped by Channel 5, putting its future in doubt. The Australian-based show has been on screens. Everybody needs good neighbours. Just give you a little bit of the programme there. Well, it's been on screens for nearly 40 years and is more popular in the UK than in its homeland. A spokesperson for Channel 5 says the show, which is reliant on British funding, will run until August. The daytime drama about the residents of Ramsay Street has launched the careers of many stars, including singer Kylie Minogue and Hollywood actress Margot Robbie. This is GB News on TV, online and DAB Plus radio. We'll bring you more news as we get it. Now, though, let's go to the political correction highlights.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking windy for many, with plenty of showers. These wintry in the north. Let's take a look at the details. The afternoon's cloud and damp weather in the southwest should be clear by this evening. It will still be blustery with some sharp showers around, but also breaks in the cloud. In the southeast, there should be a good deal of dry weather to end the day, with largely clear skies too. 1 or 2 showers, perhaps. There will still be plenty of showers across Wales this evening, but these will be starting to ease. The strong winds will be easing too. Showers will still be lingering around the Midlands as we head into the evening. They won't be as frequent as earlier in the day, though, and the winds will be gradually easing here too. It will be a mostly dry end to the day for northeastern England, where only a few showers are likely. Skies will be largely clear here, but with a calm and cold night ahead. The sleet and snow showers will continue for a time across Scotland this evening, with some icy patches too, though things are going to turn drier overnight with a sharp frost. still blustery with further showers across parts of Northern Ireland through the evening, though the winds here should quickly drop out. A few further spells of rain is possible here overnight. The showers and winds will ease, turning things calm but cold overnight. And that's how the weather's looking.
Good morning, you're watching GB News. On today's Political Correction, I'm joined by the wonderful Arlene Foster and Paul Embry, who joins us from home. Coming up this hour, as pressure continues to build for Boris Johnson, he announces 2 new appointments to his backroom staff.
Paul Givan announces his resignation as First Minister of Northern Ireland in protest against the Northern Ireland Protocol.
And the Winter Olympics commence in Beijing amid controversy and diplomatic boycotts. You can get involved with any of these subjects by emailing us on gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweeting us at gbnews. This is The Political Correction. This week, Rishi Sunak announced that the poorest in Britain will receive an extra £350 to help them through the energy bill crisis. Speaking in the Commons, the Chancellor unveiled a new support package aimed at families struggling to make ends meet. We have a clip of that right now.
Today, we're announcing an energy bills rebate worth £350. You'll receive that cash support through 2 different routes. First, all electricity customers will receive an upfront discount worth £200. That discount will then be automatically repaid from people's bills over the next 5 years in equal instalments of £40 a year, starting next April. Second, we will pay a council tax rebate of £150 to all households in bands A to D, which covers around 4 out of every 5 households in England.
But following his announcement, critics of the government immediately hit back against the measures, saying the proposals would not be enough for millions around the country facing rocketing costs and taxes. So the question that we're asking today is, was it enough? Arlene, what do you reckon?
Well, I mean, I was quite surprised at this announcement. Obviously, England and Wales are slightly different from Northern Ireland. We don't have a price cap on our energy bills there. We have a regulator who then decides whether what's been asked of her by the energy companies is acceptable given the circumstances. I wasn't really in favour of an energy cap at the time that it happened because I could foresee that something like this would happen, that the market would go away out of sync and then we would be in a very difficult situation. Oh. But I think, Deanna, given that it's not just energy costs that are rising, inflation is rising, the costs of food, and of course the ever-present national insurance rise in April, which is going to hit a lot of working families really hard. So I don't think it is enough, and I actually think announcing something like this only to have to pay it back at a time when probably the cost of living will be worse. I don't know. I just don't think it's a good policy. And
Paul, over to you on this. What have you made of the announcements from Rishi?
I think there's 2 aspects to this. I think there's the short-term issue of potentially millions of families being plunged into fuel poverty. As Arlene said, the impact of rising prices on family income, etc., disposable income. And how do we address that? I think we need to go further. I think we need to look at potentially a windfall tax on the oil and the gas companies in order to help those families who are going to be suffering fuel stress. There's no question about that. But I think we need to take a much longer term approach, which frankly we've been appalling at doing over recent years. I think we have phased out coal too quickly. I think we've been too slow on nuclear. I think renewables are clearly not as effective as we were led to believe they would be. That has left us hugely reliant on gas from overseas. So I think we really need to look at some seriously radical proposals. One thing I would want to do is to take the energy companies into public ownership, to take it away from the diktats of the market, and to have a properly long-term independent energy strategy. Now, that's obviously a debate that isn't necessarily, or measures that are necessarily going to help people in the short term. which is why I think we need to be doing more radical stuff like looking at a windfall tax, because the rebate is simply not going to be enough. We run the risk of millions of families being plunged into fuel poverty, and in this country, in this day and age, that is completely unacceptable.
Mm-hmm. I think my concern about it, I mean, I think it's great that something is being done by government to try and tackle this and ease the burden. But I think I have a few issues. One is that you can't opt out of this. So for potentially higher earners for whom this isn't going to hit too much, they're going to benefit from this cut and have to pay it back when they could arguably opt out of it and allow a slightly bigger cut to go to some of the lowest earners. I think that should have been slightly better thought through. But also, this is effectively borrowing, isn't it? What we're effectively saying is you can borrow against your energy bill, and then you're going to have to pay it back over 5 years, isn't it? Starting from next April. But we have no idea what the situation is going to look like next April. No. I think there's an expectation that global gas prices might come down, which seems to be the forecast, but we have no guarantee of that. So my concern is that we're just pushing this burden, kind of kicking it down the road effectively.
Well, certainly what's happening in Ukraine and Russia wouldn't lead you to that determination. But, I mean, Paul makes a very good point about energy policy in the whole. I mean, at the moment, we've moved away from nuclear, we've moved away from coal. People are now not wanting to have gas as a transition fuel, which of course was to be that transition to allow us to get to net zero. People just want gas out of the equation immediately, and I think that it's just not realistic. Small-scale nuclear is something that we very much should be looking to. I know France is looking to that, albeit Germany has gone in the opposite direction. And I think you're going to see a really big discussion in Europe now around this whole energy policy and whether nuclear should form a part of that. From my perspective, it should. I think there are ways to deal with financial risk, there are ways to deal with safety concerns, and I think nuclear has to be a part of the solution to what is a real problem at the moment in relation to energy.
I completely agree, and Paul, I assume you do too, because we've spoken about nuclear energy on the show before, but particularly the kind of prospect of small-scale, kind of more modular nuclear reactors.
I think it's a no-brainer. I mean, the reality is we don't have energy security. Had we been quicker to act on nuclear and recognise the benefits of it, then arguably we wouldn't have been facing the kind of situation that we're facing now. I mean, more widely, I'm as green as anybody, but you have to also be realistic about this. You can't be so green to the extreme that you run the risk of the lights going out, or that you run the risk of people being hit in a very serious way financially, or you run the risk of transitioning to a green economy at such a rate where you potentially lose thousands of jobs. So I think on the question of energy, it's been, and I think it's successive parties actually, I don't even think necessarily it's party political. I think the long-term planning over recent years has been appalling, and what we're experiencing now are the consequences of successive governments who have simply not got to grips with this properly, and at the same time as not dealing with the issue of energy security, arguably going too quickly to a green agenda. And I think that's left us in the mess that we're in now.
So on the green agenda, you mentioned taxes there, Paul, in the context of a potential windfall tax on energy companies. But do you think we should be taking away some of these taxes on energy? You know, there's an awful lot of green taxes that people are having to pay, which is raising the cost of their energy bills. Is this a tax that we can all agree we should probably try and get rid of?
Yeah.
Well, VAT, for example, you know, we were told one of the benefits of leaving the European Union is being able to scrap VAT on energy. So yeah, I mean, look, there are various ways of doing it, and certainly in terms of reducing tax so that it assists the families at the poorer end of the spectrum. Yes, all well and good. But without something radical, I fear that it's just going to be tinkering at the edges, really. I think that we really need to now start considering the windfall tax more widely in terms of, people's wages falling in real terms, the impacts of rising prices in the economy. We need to be looking at a wealth tax to ensure that millions of families do not suffer the sort of fuel poverty and more wider financial poverty that I fear many of them are destined to suffer.
I think, Paul, as well, a lot of people thought that the Chancellor would come forward with a reduction in VAT on energy bills. And I know some of our colleagues here at GBNews were campaigning for that, Liam Halligan amongst them. But I'm wondering, is the reason he didn't do that because, of course, the Northern Ireland Protocol, here's my daily warning, doesn't allow Northern Ireland to be a part of that because, of course, we have to abide by rules from Europe in relation to VAT, and that could have been part of the problem. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there as possibly why he went in a different direction.
I mean, I guess only he would know that. But in terms of whether or not a political consideration such as that has superseded what should be a very hard-headed decision about the impact on millions of families across Britain, I think that would be wrong. We need to go as far as we can, frankly, regardless of particular political considerations that might be affecting the government at the moment, to ensure that people are not going to be hit hard in the way that many are going to. But I accept that could well be part of the thinking, Arnie.
And obviously, we've spoken there about the kind of energy rebate, but what actually about the council tax rebate as well that's being proposed? Because that's for everyone in band A to D properties. Yeah. But I think one of my concerns about this from a levelling up perspective is that the council tax bills for people in certain parts of the country, including in County Durham, are actually much higher than some of those living in band A to D properties in other parts of the country where their council tax is much lower. So as a proportion, this isn't going to help as much anyway. So I'm just not sure that necessarily we've got the approach right on this.
Do you think levelling up wasn't at the forefront of his mind when he was making that decision?
I think levelling up is always at the forefront of the Chancellor's mind. As my constituency neighbour, I sincerely hope that is the case. But anyway, you may have seen this week that former Minister Nick Gibb has become the latest Conservative MP to publicly call for Boris Johnson's resignation. Writing in the Daily Telegraph, Gibb confirmed that he had submitted a letter of no confidence to the 1922 committee. He said that the Conservative Party must face hard truths and that his constituents are furious about the double standards following so-called Partygate. It comes after a flurry of resignations from Number 10 staff this week, including long-standing policy chief Munira Mirza. So what happens next? Yeah, well, what happened next, obviously last night we had a couple of announcements. Guido Hare has gone in as Director of Communications. He was with Boris in City Hall when Boris was the Mayor of London. And Steve Barclay, one of your colleagues, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, he's now going to be the Chief of Staff as well. I'm not quite sure how he's going to manage to juggle both of those. Is that a problem? Well, that's now two appointments, of course, that will kind of both become sort of be MPs in a sort of semi-ministerial role in the Cabinet Office, but also working in Number 10 because, of course, Andrew Griffiths as well has taken up a role. He's the first of the 2019 intake to be given ministerial status. I'm very pleased for him.
There is hope.
Really,
hope springs eternal.
Oh, gosh, hope springs eternal. Not for me. But I think it's going to be a really interesting twin track, and I think really does show that there is a change of approach now to really try and unite Number 10 and the Parliamentary Party, which is actually something that a lot of us have been calling for a really long time. But Paul, what have you made of it, dare I ask?
Well, how long have you got? I mean, the Steve Barclay appointment, Chief of Staff, I think is bizarre, considering that you know he's a member of Parliament himself. There seems to me to be potentially all sorts of issues there arising over what could be clear conflicts of interest between his position as Chief of Staff and also a member of Parliament himself going forward. So it would be interesting to see how that pans out. I mean, look, these resignations, I think, are very clearly being choreographed in such a way as to do maximum damage. We saw something similar, in fact, with Jeremy Corbyn during the so-called chicken coup a few years ago, where members of his shadow front bench would resign every kind of hour almost. And that was designed to create that drip effect to maximise the pressure. And I think something similar is going on. And it just does make you wonder, really, you know, when the end point is going to come, because I think it probably is inevitable. I think the difficulty for the Prime Minister is he's been seen to have committed the two, I think, worst sins in the eyes of the public. One is hypocrisy, and one is misleading people about that hypocrisy. And I just think there are lots of things that the electorate would forgive, but those two things strike me as being things that they rarely forgive. So, the question really is, does the Prime Minister still have any sort of moral authority? I don't think he does, really. I think his moral authority has gone, and when that happens, I think it's just a matter of time before the Prime Minister himself goes.
Well, I think it's interesting that in Nick Gibbs' sort of piece in The Telegraph, he spoke about his inbox and his constituents, and I think all of us as MPs do take a real steer from our inbox. Obviously, it has to be handled with a pinch of salt, because sometimes there are very political campaigns that come through, and certainly I've had a lot of my local Labour membership asking for Boris's resignation, which, you can appreciate. But actually, I think the thing that I found incredibly striking has been not just the number of kind of emails and calls to the office, but the fact it's people who have either never written to me before or have only ever written about very personal things. So it's less of a kind of political campaign, and it's people just being incredibly frustrated at what they're seeing. But, as Conservative MPs, we have a very careful line to tread here. One is, thoughts on the situation and how it's been handled. But one is also looking more widely at the position that the country's in at the moment, and also geopolitically looking at Russia, Ukraine. And my concern is that the length of a leadership election in the Conservative Party, it can be several months. And can the country at this point in time really sit without a proper leader for several months? I think that's something that a lot of Conservative MPs are weighing up at the moment. And
that's the balance that Conservative MPs will have to make. Plus, also, if they go too quickly, does that then allow Boris to stay in position for a further year? Because under the current rules of the 1922 committee, you can't call another leadership election until a year has passed. And I know there was some talk of changing those rules, but that's where we are at the minute. And surely May is a big moment, Deanna, for the Prime Minister.
Well, I'd say so. Of course, now that we're into the new year, people around the country, activists around the country, are really gearing up for these local elections, which are so important. I mean, people kind of talk about local elections in a way that they're quite small and low key, but actually for local areas and for the actual impact that you can have on people's lives, on their day-to-day lives, they're so important, but also important for the Prime Minister and his authority as well. So I suppose a lot of people probably are thinking, let's wait until May, let's give it a little bit more time, see what the outcome is, and then move. But it's that fine line of do we act now and get it done, or do we wait and see if the Prime Minister can really restore his authority and get a grip on things on number 10, but on his own kind of reputation.
But there is the organisational issue at number 10 and what's going on in number 10. But wider, and if you look at a lot of Conservative commentators and what they're saying, it's actually the cost of living crisis and how that has been handled, energy policy and how that has been handled, that will actually be the undoing of the Conservative Party. Because really, are these Conservative policies? And the answer is not really.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, welcome back to the Political Correction, and your views flooding in at the moment about the energy crisis. Arlene?
Yeah, so Jane says, apart from a mortgage, I've never borrowed money and do not want to borrow £200 from the government. How do I opt out? I do not want debt. Well, I think that's the problem. You can't opt out, not something that you were saying, Deanna, earlier on.
Yeah, quite right. Well, David here says, Paul wants energy returned to public ownership. Has he not heard about the 1970s? It was in public ownership and an almighty mess because of that. I'm sure Paul will have something to say about that one when he gets back on camera in a little while.
I'm sure he will too. And Stephen says, does Rishi Sunak think offering a loan to people really helps him? He's so out of touch, it's laughable. I'll not ask you to comment on that.
And I won't be commenting on that. Janice here says they've got to drop green taxes and start saving and getting our own gas, electric, coal and nuclear. Goes back to what we were all saying there really about the energy mix.
Yeah, and it's important to have a mix. You can't just rely on one because then you don't have security. Anne says, when we converted to North Sea gas in the 70s, we were told that there was enough gas in our fields to last the country for 100 years. What has happened to it? Well, it's still there, but policy from governments have changed, not least the Scottish government, of course, who came out against that new field in the North Sea. So that's what happened there, Anne.
Yeah, I think it just seems to be a shame to not be using our natural resource like that. But and then finally, Scott says, I work for an energy company and have done so for the last 14 years, and I've never seen a price increase like this in all the time I've worked in the industry. I have genuine fear at how people will choose between heating and eating going forward, but also have real worry about the abuse that staff will unfortunately get from customers calling in to discuss the price increase, as no one seems to think of the people at the other end of the phone. I think that's something that actually hadn't occurred to me, but is a really fair point there from Scott. So I guess this is a call out from us at GB News that if you are contacting your energy company, just remember the people on the other end of the phone are human too, doing their job and actually facing the same pressures that we all are on this.
Absolutely, and it's important that we do remember this. So thank you for those GB views. So we're going to move on now to Northern Ireland. And Northern Ireland's First Minister, Paul Givan, resigned this week from his position as First Minister as part of the DUP's protest against the Northern Ireland Protocol. Mr Givan described his 8-month tenure in office as the privilege of his lifetime.
Mr Givan's resignation, along with announcements in this week's Levelling Up White Paper, has reopened the discussion around devolution and how much governing autonomy should be bestowed to different parts of the United Kingdom. So what is devolution and how far should localised powers extend? I think, Arlene, we have to come to you first on this one.
So devolution in Scotland and Wales came about. Do you remember the Welsh referendum was very, very close as to whether there should be devolution or not? And of course, Scottish devolution happened after Tony Blair decided it was a good way to try and stem the growth of Scottish nationalism. Unfortunately, it has somewhat backfired in that regard. And devolution in Northern Ireland came about after the Belfast Agreement back in 1998 when the parties came together and we had that historic agreement at that point in time. So the interesting thing about devolution across the regions of the United Kingdom is that it's different in each part of the region. So whilst energy policy is devolved in Northern Ireland, it's certainly not devolved in Scotland. And of course, in Scotland, they can raise income tax by, I think it's a penny in the pound, and then spend that money how they will. But of course, we don't have those powers in Northern Ireland. So there's different types of devolution depending where you are in the United Kingdom. And I think we're going to talk about levelling up later on. Yes. But Paul, you will recall Tony Blair's scheme of devolution for Scotland. It has somewhat backfired, has it not?
Well, it has, because as you touched on, Arlene, the whole point of bringing devolution at the turn of the century, as the new Labour government did, was for it really to act as some sort of bulwark against the independence movement. You know, the idea was if we gave people a certain amount of power, then that would assuage them and they would be happy with that and they wouldn't demand full-blown independence. In fact, you know, the law of unintended consequences, what we've seen is the opposite. So some of these devolved areas have clearly got the taste for self-government to a certain degree and want more of it. And I'm a unionist myself, but I suspect the genie may be out of the bottle. I mean, I certainly think that in terms of Scotland, for example, the independence movement there tends to be stronger when there's a Tory government in Westminster because of the strong anti-Tory sentiment that exists across large parts of Scotland. So whether or not that would be tempered in the event of a Labour government again in the future remains to be seen. But I think that the clamour for independence is such. I mean, I know the polls are not particularly decisive at the moment, but I think the movement over recent years is such that there's an argument to say that in the long run it's inevitable. And I think that would be unfortunate because we are stronger as a union, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And of course, the reason why Paul Givan, before we move on to levelling up, resigned was not to do with devolution per se, but of course to do with the implementation of the protocol. Mm-hmm. The DUP have been saying for some time now, I do recall the leader making a speech back in September of last year that if it was a choice between the protocol and the Belfast Agreement, then the institutions would suffer. And here we have that coming through, because he says that when he asked the Prime Minister about the protocol in October, that there was 3 weeks to get it sorted. Mm-hmm. Then, of course, you will recall Lord Frost resigned, and then around Christmas he was the Brexit negotiator dealing with the protocol. And then when Sir Geoffrey asked the Prime Minister earlier on in January what the chances are of getting an agreement on dealing with the protocol with the European Union, he put it at about 20 or 30%. So we shouldn't be surprised that the DUP has taken this action. Both the Belfast Agreement and the protocol are international agreements. Mm-hmm. And so one of them has to give, because they are incompatible at this present moment in time. So there is a real need now to sort out the protocol, because at the minute we have an internal border within the United Kingdom, and that, of course, should not be the case.
Well, can we talk about Article 16? Because this is kind of the buzz phrase that's used at the moment, and this is the thing that can be triggered to try and resolve some of these issues. But can you just explain to us how that works and what it would look like on the ground?
So Article 16 is actually part of the protocol. It was put in there to say if there are societal, economic or environmental damage caused by the protocol to Northern Ireland, then Article 16 could be triggered to call time on the operation of the protocol and find a solution to deal with those problems. We have been willing, I say we, unionists in Northern Ireland, have been willing the United Kingdom government to pull Article 16 right throughout last year. We thought it was going to happen in October, November time of last year. You'll recall we touched on it then. But unfortunately it didn't. And as a result, the DUP have taken unilateral action. But it's still not too late for our own sovereign government to deal with this matter. And I did notice last week, Diana, in some of the papers, I think it was the Express, 80 of your colleagues had said now was the time to trigger Article 16, and it's long past the time, actually.
And you'll be pleased to know it would have been 81 if I'd realised that letter was going in. So
good.
But anyway, we've just discussed there prior to the protocol about devolution. But of course, we're talking quite a lot at the moment about real localised devolution in England as well. Because this week the government has released its much anticipated levelling up white paper, aiming to ensure that prosperity is shared amongst all regions of the UK.
Of course, this is the flagship strategy aiming to close the gap between rich and poorer areas by 2030, to improve education, broadband and transport, as well as to delegate more localised powers across England.
Labour have criticised the proposals, saying the ideas lack ambition and funding.
So what is levelling up? A great buzz phrase. And why is the government pushing so hard for it? And what are its prospects for success, Deanna?
I think we could do a whole show on this, couldn't we, really? But we won't put you through that, I promise. Levelling up, I think it means something a little bit different to everyone. But the crux of levelling up is that it shouldn't be fair that if you're growing up in a less affluent part of the country, that you have access to fewer opportunities than someone growing up in a more affluent part of the country. That is the crux of it. And so the government has been pulling together the levelling up white paper to try and flesh that out a bit, to look at the specifics, to look at what areas need to be targeted. So there are a lot. I think in the paper there were 12 key aims, and I've got them printed out somewhere in a sheet over here. I'm not going to run you through all of them, but I think the key ones really to focus on are on education, looking at making sure primary school children achieve the expected standard in reading, writing and maths. There's a 2030 aim on that, and there's been the implementation of 55 education investment areas to try and really focus where outcomes at the moment on education are the weakest. Also looking at life expectancy, looking at narrowing the gap between rich and poor, things about people's satisfaction with their town centres, and already the government's been doing quite a lot of work on kind of improving town centres through the Towns Fund and Future High Streets Fund. But the one to me that I find the most interesting, because I'm a massive political geek, is this one about local devolution. Because we've seen it be really successful in different parts of the country. From my perspective, my neighbour in the Tees Valley, Ben Houchin, has been incredibly successful at getting jobs and investment into the Tees Valley. Looking over at Greater Manchester there, we've seen Andy Burnham, again, having great success at improving things like transport in Greater Manchester. So devolution, when it works, can be a real success in kind of improving the prosperity and opportunities in an area. So the government's going to be focusing initially on 9 areas for new devolution deals, of which I'm very pleased to say County Durham is one of them. But I think, devolution in and of itself is a good thing, but it has to go broader than that. It has to be about the opportunities that it brings to people.
Well, devolution works, Deanna, though, when people are all going in the same direction.
Yes.
And I think that's the problem at the minute in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, actually. Because if you're not working together with Westminster and moving in the same direction, then there's this tension, and actually more time is spent dealing with the tensions than actually the good that you can do for your own particular area. Yes. And that is the problem if you're going off in different directions. So it'll work if everybody's pulling together.
Well, that's a real concern for us in County Durham, actually. So we're talking about whether we want an elected mayor or not. My view is no for that very reason, because if you end up with a government and an elected mayor butting heads, I think that can bring about some element of stalemate. So I think you're right, that sort of moving in the same direction. But certainly going to be interesting seeing how this sort of plays out. And Paul, we're very aware we haven't sort of let you in yet. What did you make of the white paper? Do you think it goes far enough?
I think the 12 points are okay as far as they go, but I think the elephant in the room really is the truth is that in order to level up in the way that the government wants, it is going to take very, very serious funding. It is going to take huge amounts of investment. And my concern actually is that the rhetoric isn't backed up by a commitment to funding. I mean, there's limited new money involved, I think. I mean, it's fair to say that some of this money is recycled. And levelling up, to me, isn't simply about, shiny new buildings or moving certain government departments to other parts of the country, or even introducing new mayors. I'm not necessarily against that, but that isn't the be-all and end-all of it. If you look at Germany, for example, when Germany levelled up, it did it as a result of huge investment in the poorer parts of the country, particularly East Germany, where Germany was reunified. So I'm pessimistic, I have to say. I think the rhetoric is good, but I think it isn't matched by the reality.
I think that's a really good point, Paul, and there has certainly been criticism about the kind of investment here. But I think my counter-argument would be it's not always about spending money. Sometimes it's setting up the right framework for private investment as well, which I think is something that sometimes people on your side of the argument sometimes overlook a little bit, that actually getting that business investment in doesn't always take money to do that. It can take changes in regulation or tax regimes.
Yeah, and
I'm not necessarily against that, but there's a danger that it just ends up becoming tinkering at the edges. Get the regulation right, get the framework right, encourage the private sector to flourish, but ultimately, without serious investment, you're not going to revive our industrial base. You're not going to create the sort of infrastructure projects that will bring thousands of new jobs and decent wages, etc. It needs much more than it's being given at the moment, I think, Deanna.
Yeah, and I think it also needs to work in conjunction with the union connectivity review as well, which of course came out finally in terms of its final paper in November of last year and looked at the transport links right across the UK. So that's an important part as well. But coming up after the break, we're taking a look at the controversy surrounding the Winter Olympics in Beijing. So don't go anywhere.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate.
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
Make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
Right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, welcome back to the Political Correction. And again, your views have been flooding in this morning.
So on the energy crisis, Peter says Sunak's help is not enough and barely targeted. We need a proper energy strategy, and this should have been looked at years ago. We need nuclear, gas exploration, fracking and new oil extraction.
Well, a lot coming in on the energy crisis. We've got Tony here who says if you were to put these advisors on the minimum wage, they would starve because they lack drive and common sense.
And then John says this 23% green tax on energy is simply a tax promoted by middle-class eco-warriors aimed at the poor.
David says the government are not giving anything to deal with the energy price hike. They're simply reducing the potential increase.
And Frank says going green is the correct way to go, but we must convert on a measured way until wind, tidal, etc. can take over. This is the idea of transition, which I actually very much agree with. You can't just switch one off and switch another on. For instance, using our own resources instead of exporting carbon, such as fracking and coal, which would, in a worldwide situation, reduce the carbon caused by importing.
And then we've got a view in there on Brexit as well, from Camilla, who says Lord Frost needs to be brought back to solve the Northern Ireland Protocol, or Arlene Foster. Liz Truss obviously not made an impression on the EU. I think to give Liz some credit, she's not really been had responsibility for that for very long.
Not for very long.
Few weeks,
No.
But we wish her well in trying to tackle some of those issues. Now, the Winter Olympics have commenced in Beijing, taking place from the 4th until the 20th of February, with about 3,000 athletes competing in 109 different events.
The Games are, of course, surrounded by controversy, with countries including the United Kingdom, the United States and Canada all declaring a diplomatic boycott due to China's human rights abuses.
Ian Duncan-Smith, who represents the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, said the Chinese government commits industrial-scale human rights abuses in the Uyghur region and Tibet, and sends near-daily military incursions into Taiwan's airspace. We cannot lend any legitimacy to China's despotic regime. So I suppose the question is the diplomatic boycott the right course of action, and will it actually be in any way effective?
Yeah, well, I think in terms of the coverage back here of the Olympics, it has been very muted. Of course, the opening ceremony was on Friday when Vladimir Putin arrived and was greatly lauded by President Xi. And they then came out with some announcements on Ukraine and Russia. But in terms of the actual games itself, I do feel for our athletes that are out there, this is the pinnacle of their career. And whilst we've never been as close to the Winter Olympics as the Summer Olympics, it's always really good to follow our athletes and see what they're doing. So I do feel for our athletes out there without any diplomatic support. Even Princess Anne didn't travel. And of course, she goes to all of the Olympic events, Diana.
Yeah, I think she did put out a sort of video message to the athletes, didn't she? But not quite the same. Paul, what are your views? Do you think the diplomatic boycott is the right thing?
Well, I just think, look, you can't really give credence to the whole process of selection, which resulted in Beijing being given the Winter Olympics, and the vote took place. And you took part in that process. And then further down the line, when the event itself is about to begin and all the athletes are in place, all of a sudden there's this big diplomatic storm over the Chinese regime and whether or not it was right to give the Olympics to Beijing in the first place. It seems to me that that particular horse has bolted. And I do think I agree with Arlene. I mean, in terms of the athletes who are there, it's unfortunate because all of the coverage is about political issues. Rather than the events themselves, and I certainly have little time for the Chinese regime. But let's not forget also that this is not a one-off. I mean, we're going to be holding a World Cup later this year in Qatar, and Qatar has got a pretty appalling human rights record in some areas as well. But there isn't enough being made about that. So I think the whole thing is riddled with hypocrisy, to be perfectly blunt, and the timing I just think is absurd.
I think it has been interesting seeing how sort of the athletes and actually some of those covering the Olympics have got on. There was a report this morning about a Dutch reporter who was dragged away by Chinese security whilst he was live on air. He was later allowed to continue his piece to camera. But I think that's quite damaging, doesn't it? And does that not say a lot about China and its kind of approach to censorship?
Yeah, absolutely. But I do want to give a shout out to Team GB athletes and to maybe some of their families who are at home watching on. I was looking up this morning, and the curling mixed doubles, Jen Dodds and Bruce Murat, they are hopefully moving into the semi-final. So you don't know, we might get a medal out of Beijing. Wouldn't that be great? I think we got 5 at the last Winter Olympics, and it would be really good if we could build on that. But of course, part of the issue with the Olympics is it's been used as a platform by China. We had Vladimir Putin arriving and of course, been lauded by President Xi. And Taiwan has condemned the timing of China and Russia's no-limit partnership. The government says the Chinese government is bringing shame to the Winter Olympics, which began on Friday.
Well, 1 hour before the Winter Olympics opened, China and Russia backed each other over standoffs on Ukraine and Taiwan. They promised to collaborate together more against the West. Former Pentagon official Elbridge Colby says China and Russia becoming such close allies is an indictment of American statecraft. But joining us now is Dr. Jacob Lassin. He's a postdoctoral fellow at the Malikian Centre for Russian, Eurasian and East European Studies. Dr. Lassin, thank you for joining us. What did you make of the very sort of quick collaboration between President Jinping and President Putin?
You know, it was a very interesting, document to see come out at a very pointed moment. Clearly, it's aimed at the NATO partners, and even though the document itself does not mention Ukraine at all, it's all clearly about issues stemming from what's going on right now in Ukraine, and of course China's longstanding antagonism with the West over Taiwan. And the fact that, as you mentioned, there's been so much of a diplomatic boycott, and that Vladimir Putin was the kind of guest of honor at the opening ceremony, really shows kind of where the Chinese and the Russians want to take this relationship, and how they want to use their relationship as a way of standing together against the West.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of Taiwan's response, realistically, what action can they take in response to this no-limits partnership?
Yeah, I do not think that there's really too many concrete actions that Taiwan can take right now. Aside from strengthening their relationships with Western countries, we've seen the Australian, UK, and US alliance about building nuclear submarines that would be in the Pacific as something that could, help act to defend Taiwan going forward. But really, I don't know if there can be much that Taiwan itself can do, aside from making known their displeasure and trying to get more attention put onto the issue.
And I suppose the other question is, what can NATO do? Because, of course, this coming together, this deep strategic partnership between Russia and China is clearly to send a message to NATO and to say thus far and no further in relation to NATO expansion.
I think the major thing that NATO can do is to make sure that it has a unified response. Having every different country come up with its own response, its own plan of action is just going to make it look weaker. So making sure that NATO remains kind of unified, that NATO is able to speak with one voice, that NATO does not break down based on the different economic and other political considerations of its constituent members, is going to be its best course of action moving forward.
Mm-hmm. That's a very interesting point, of course, because here in the UK we've been disappointed with the reaction from some of the EU states, Jacob, in terms of their slowness to come out and take the line that NATO has been taken. And actually, America had a bit of a rocky start as well. But for you, you're saying that NATO really needs to speak with one voice. That's an important point, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that, having the kind of different responses and being able to kind of pick off countries based on, their own individual concerns has been really beneficial to Putin's larger strategy here. And knowing that, for instance, Germany is really reliant on Russian natural gas and being able to perhaps get a softer response from Germany has been able to bolster Putin's position.
Yeah. And Dr. Lassin, given your read of the current situation with, troops built up on the Ukrainian border and now what looks like the kind of erection of various structures that look like they could be linked to an invasion, how likely do you think an invasion into Ukraine is?
I still don't think a large-scale invasion is the most likely. I think that, at this point, Putin has gotten a lot of the concessions and a lot of the conversation to go in the direction that he wants it to. Where we see that in the next few weeks that President Macron and Chancellor Scholz are going to be visiting Moscow. And the fact that he's been able to get, EU members to come to him and to have these conversations start up again about shared security in Europe, about where NATO is going to be able to have weapons systems and do exercises, has really been able to move the ball really into Russia's court. And as a result, he's been able to get things onto the agenda that NATO and the West haven't been talking about for almost decades now.
Brilliant. Well, Dr. Lassin, thank you so much for your insights on this this really sort of quickly unfolding and fascinating, if slightly worrying situation.
Very worrying, yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And we're going to move on now to the northeast. And a farmer has been cleared by a jury after he defended his property by flipping a car off his land using a tractor.
Robert Hooper argued during his 4-day trial that an Englishman's home is his castle and claimed he had been assaulted before he used a tractor to shift the Vauxhall Corsa from a lane outside his farm in Newbiggin, County Durham.
Outside Durham Crown Court, Teesdale farmers gathered to support Mr Hooper and cheered as he was cleared of dangerous driving and criminal damage. And joining us to discuss this story is Bob Danby, the manager of Teesdale Agricultural Support Services. Bob.
Well, Bob, thank you so much for joining us. Bob and I have known each other for, 2-3 years now, and I'm really grateful to you for coming on the show. I guess, my first question is, we know that Teesdale had a very busy summer over the past couple of years, but did it become quite a regular occurrence of farmers having their access blocked?
Not really. We noticed a difference in the type of visitors that were coming into Teesdale. The vast majority of visitors are respectful, but over the last 2 years, it suddenly seems to become an alternative Ibiza with the party people coming here.
And how frustrating is it for the farming community when they're kind of unable to access their own land? We can see there the clip of the courser being flipped over the wall and the quite aggressive kind of kickback from the owner of the vehicle.
Yeah, it doesn't happen too often, thankfully. It does cause some inconvenience for the farmers, but the vast majority of the times this happens, it's solved quite amicably. People quite respectful of the vehicles.
But clearly, this was a case that kind of really rocked Teesdale, and the court case and the trial's been ongoing for a long time now. What did you make of the outcome of the court case?
I think, along with a lot of the other rest of the people, I was really pleased at the outcome. I have a lot of sympathy for the farmer concerned. Can you imagine a moment of madness, if you want to call it that, and then for the next 9 months, your whole life's on hold, you may go to prison, your business is under threat, your whole livelihood, your whole lifestyle, the whole way of life is under threat because of what happened there.
Mm-hmm. And do you hope that the outcome of it might kind of make people think twice about not just kind of blocking access onto farmers' land, but also about kind of acting so belligerently if it happened?
I would like to think that it would have an effect, but with the type of business that we've been having in those people, I don't know whether they really think about that. As I say, the vast majority of people who come to visit Teesdale are really respectful and treat the countryside the way it should be treated. Teesdale love to see those people come here. But if you want to come here and cause problems, then much rather you do that somewhere else.
On Mark Dolan tonight, my Big Opinion monologue is all about the Queen's 70 years on the throne. What is her legacy? I'll be asking top royal journalist Jenny Bond. In the big question, can Boris Johnson bounce back? I'll ask former Minister under Margaret Thatcher, Edwina Currie. Inspirational head teacher Mike Fairclough is my Mark Meets guest, and he'll be telling me why education needs a reboot and why he's against vaccines for kids. Plus my all-star panel. See you at 9.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking windy for many, with plenty of showers. These wintry in the north. Let's take a look at the details. The afternoon's cloud and damp weather in the southwest should be clear by this evening. It will still be blustery with some sharp showers around, but also breaks in the cloud. In the southeast, there should be a good deal of dry weather to end the day, with largely clear skies too. 1 or 2 showers perhaps. There will still be plenty of showers across Wales this